Hey everybody, so today I'm actually calling you in from paradise. This is why I'm making this beautiful video. Let me show you what paradise looks like. So look at that beautiful beach. I'm not sure if you can see it. Look at that beautiful beach. And I am on the coast of Mexico in Tulum actually. So what I wanted to talk about in today's video is really about attachment styles, but not so much attachment styles as much as why over-identifying with one particular attachment style, or why identifying with an attachment style and making that our whole focus can actually take away from the real focus, which is the wound. Now, the difference between an attachment style and a wound, that's what this video is really going to be about. An attachment style is just a coping mechanism. It is basically the result of a wound. It is your coping mechanism. It is the strategy. It is what the ego had adapted and chose to evolve as a strategy, chose to use as you were developing as a child. And the reason that it chose to do this is using it as a mechanism to survive based on your environment and based on your wound. Those two very strong things. So you talk about the different attachment styles, right? You have the anxious, you have the avoidant, the disorganized, you have the secure. Those are the ones we talk about primarily. Now, each one of those was created primarily from a very similar wound, the wound being around abandonment, invalidation, and rejection. But based on the environment, the child at the time and the ego development of the child at the time says, okay, based on what's going on in your world right now, based on what's going on in this environment, in this situation, if I approach and ask for love in this way, or ask for connection in this way, it might be met or might not be met. So for the anxious attachment, for example, you approach connection with the attempt to fight or with an attempt to fawn, to people please, or anything else, so that will ultimately bring some level back of like love or connection back to us. And the attempt with that is that ultimately connection is what we really want, and we want this, we'll do anything to be able to get it from someone, right? So those are our programs. Now with the avoidant, for example, the flight program, which is the survival program that we take upon with that attachment, comes out from a place where this child and this ego identity has sensed that every time I ask for like love, connection, or validation, it keeps getting shut down. I keep getting shamed for expressing my emotions, for feeling this. So instead, what I think is safer for me to do is to just go into a room, sit by myself, just focus on my hobbies, my toys, anything else. And so at that point, that child now has developed the avoidant attachment based on what was in their surrounding. And in their environment, in their surrounding, the ego recognized that they would probably be invalidated more often than not. So they said, you know what, it's safer for me to just not try and do that. So I'll use this avoidant. I'll step into this avoidant mechanism of just obsessing about something else. But the key thing about it here is the pain that originates does not originate because of an attachment style. That's the most important thing. So even when you get into a relationship with someone and you're like, oh my God, you know, I've noticed that I'm either texting too much, I'm worrying too much, I'm waiting for them to keep responding to me, and like, you know, I need this many texts a day before I feel safe. Yes, you are anxiously attached, but what's actually, you may feel the surface symptoms as your pattern, the people you attract, and the attachment you have, so you're anxiously attached to them. But your pain is actually originating not on that surface. That's just reflecting back the pain to you. So every time you want the partner to communicate to you and they're not, every time you really need someone to validate you and they're not, anytime you're trying to express your emotions and you feel like it's not considered, the pain of that is a reflection of something much deeper inside, and that's the wound. That's the real cause of what's actually even created your attachment style. And that, coming back to it, is your abandonment, your rejection, or your invalidation wound. And almost all of us have that in different ways, in different stories, but the premise of that wound is pretty much the same. And why is that? Because a child really needs, one of the most powerful and basic needs of a child is the opposite of those things. So needing validation, needing security, so not feeling abandoned, needing like love, attention, and care, needing support, needing approval. So once a child receives those things, those other wounds tend to diminish, and the belief about themselves that they feel those things also tend to diminish. So let's come back again to the wound and the attachment style, right? So now we're saying, okay, I've had this attachment style though for maybe like 20, 30, 40 years. So what you're saying to me is that that's not really my problem? No, that is not really your problem. In fact, that's part of the solution, because that's giving you more insight into where the problem comes from. what that really is, as I said to you guys, it's just your plan of action. Take it as that, like a plan of action that your ego uses to attempt to get something from way, 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 way back when that it still hasn't really gotten. That's really what it's about. So if you just attack the plan of action, if you just attack the attachment style, if you just focus on the symptom, you may be able to find temporary relief in the present, but you're not really going to be able to find a more permanent, sustained relief. Which is why, and I will honestly say this, like my mom was a relational psychologist and a counselor. We used to have these discussions a lot. One of the issues I used to have is that relational psychology, unfortunately, focuses a lot with couples only in the present. Understanding their interactions only in the present moment, trying to figure out what they're trying to say to each other in the present moment, why the pain is showing up in those conflicts. But why we even show up that way is way more important, way, way, way more important. Even if we're having continuous conflict, it may be because, oh yeah, the two of us are like butting heads, or the two of us don't agree on something, or the two of us are feeling really challenged. But why are we even showing up that way? Why do we even have this need that I need to be over-validated? Why am I even insecure about this particular thing that triggers me when you talk to me about it? All of that comes from our core wounds. And so back to attachment styles and attaching to the core wound, or relating to the core wound, if we're able to look at our attachment style, so look at our coping mechanism and say, what does it really do for me? I was telling a student about this just this morning in the Gauntlet. And I was telling her through Discord, which is our communication platform for the community, I was saying to her, try and use this little trick to identify how it is that your attachment style shows up, or your reactions show up, or your survival programs show up in each individual situation. So what is it that in each situation you're not just reacting to, or how are you reacting? So if you're bringing out either fight, flight, freeze, fawn, depending on whichever one it is, if you can assess what was the reaction that I actually had, so how did I actually pull this out, how did I react, what did I do? Second, what was the trigger that did it? So identifying what the trigger was and the stimulus, because now you're getting closer to it. And the third and the most valuable point, what did that stimulus or a trigger represent? What was that feeling that it brought about for me that made me have this kind of reaction? Most often you'll say, I felt like I was going to be rejected. I felt like my voice was not being heard, which represents invalidation. I felt like my points were not being considered. My needs were not being recognized. All of those representing invalidation. I felt like that person was going to leave me, so I had to cling on to that, which represents abandonment. So if you track these, now you're like, holy shit. So that's what the real crux of the issue is that is what's driving the creation of an attachment style. So if you just work on the symptoms, like I said, you will find temporary relief, like kind of like putting a Band-Aid on, as bad as it sounds, on some kind of internal disease or cause like cancer or something. Just putting Band-Aids and addressing just the temporary wound, but not going back to like killing the cause of it. Which is why chemotherapy, primarily, and radiation focus on destroying the cells at their origin, so that once they destroy the source of the problem, then it starts showing up very differently. Now you have better, like you can breathe better, you feel better, sleep better, all of those things symptomatically on top. So always, always, always go back to the root of what it is, and especially with attachment styles. Now let's say, take for example the avoidant, right? So if you take the avoidant talks about, oh yeah, when this person asked me to move in, I suddenly stopped talking to them. I suddenly was like, oh no, I need to create disconnection or something else. So what that does for you in that moment is it starts to say, instead of putting the focus on them and saying like, they're the ones asking me for something that's really intimidating, so I want to step away, you ask yourself, what was the trigger, okay? What did it represent? It represented some sort of intimidation, right? Of getting close. Why is getting close to someone really scary? And then you start to think, oh my God, it's because when I was really young, I had no idea of like what it was like to really get close to my family. In fact, when I tried to ask them for something, when I tried to express my emotions to my dad, when I tried to ask my mom for a hug or something, they were either too busy, they were like, you're a boy or you're a grown-up girl or something, stop asking for these things. So they invalidated me. Or they just said, I don't have time for this. Or I was with my nannies or something else. Any of those things that you suddenly realize, those are the last times I really attempted emotional intimacy, and it was scary because it just led to rejection. Now you're getting back to the wound. And if you start focusing on the wound, and now, okay, moving to the next part of this conversation. So I've taken this direction about attachment styles and I've gotten close to my wound. What the fuck does this mean now? This means now that that's the point of of addressing. That's the point where you actually need to focus on, okay, give yourself the attention to work on it, to the tangible space where you need to put on the care. So you say, okay, so this is my wound. I recognize that this happened. Like when I tried to approach my parents, that love and validation was not given. I can't approach them now and ask them for it because they're very different. I'm very different. Even if they do it, it might be fake, it might be real. I don't need it the same way, etc., etc., etc. So the important thing is for you to be able to give it to yourself. And that is the entire crux of reparenting, is that you take the responsibility and the accountability of now trying to connect with your own inner child and reparent the wound that you're hurting from. So when it comes back to whether you're anxious, avoidant, whatever you are, I tell people this all the time. We almost always have the same baseline of the wound. How it's manifested has been entirely different because culturally, like societally, like, you know, religiously, we've all had different conditioning, but the baseline of that feeling is the same because our needs as children are always the same. And so when you look at it that way, you're now like, okay, so if I start to focus on what are those unmet needs that I have had for the last fucking 30 years, and if I can find a way to be able to address them and connect with how my inner child wanted them to be shown back to me, how my inner child really wanted the connection from them, then perhaps my story could drastically change. And that is ultimately how you work from your insecure attachment style towards secure. You cannot heal an attachment style because an attachment style is a symptom. An attachment style is just something that reflects and shows you how the wound is manifesting as pain. And so when you use those as feedback, when you use them as directional mechanisms to be able to look at what the real cause is, and you can actually work on that through reparenting, meditations, like going back and trying to discover more of your past, accepting that, okay, what happened is something I cannot change. Acceptance is very, very different from allowing. Acceptance is very different from justifying. Acceptance is just simply saying, okay, that did happen. That's my reality. Now what do I do with it? How do I go with it? Because a lot of the time we're trying to ignore it. A lot of the time we're trying to fight it. We're subconsciously trying to invalidate the invalidation so that we can just live a life where we don't think that part of us is true, but it is. And so when we now focus on that a little more, and when we start, going back and recognizing it, journaling also to say, oh, these memories are coming up, these thoughts are coming up, these feelings are coming up, and I don't know where they're coming up from. We're now recognizing our real needs. We're now recognizing the needs of the inner child. And finally, we're giving them attention, and we're giving them a thought, and we're giving them value. And when we start doing that, we start to create more of like a whole child. We're starting to heal the child. We're starting to finally make ourselves feel a little more complete from within. When you do that, you start to create a massive level of internal security. As you're creating this level of internal security, how you start attaching externally changes drastically, because your dependency on the external to validate you, to now support you, to show up for you constantly in an addictive manner, so to speak, it starts to dwindle. You don't need it because you're creating more of that love and that internal security from within. And that's what's really important when it comes to understanding how an attachment style can take you closer to your wound, and how it can show you where the real problem is, and therefore how it can show you how to create the real solution. So I've put up a couple of videos on reparenting. I'll put up some more, and I would say listen to those, take a little glance into those, and those will give you some more value in terms of the actual logistics, so to speak, the semantics of how you can really work towards healing and reparenting and creating more internal security and love. So that's what I have to offer you from beautiful, sunny Tulum, Mexico. Love you guys, and keep watch out for the next videos that come up.